Since the beginning of time, God's presence has been made known. At creation, he hovered over the entire earth. As the children of Israel wandered the desert, his presence was a cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. To Elijah, God's presence was not in the wind or earthquake or fire, but in a gentle whisper. When Jesus was born, God's presence was experienced in his only Son, the light of the world. And when Jesus established his church, his presence appeared as tongues of fire. Today, God's presence can still be experienced in extraordinary ways in our everyday lives. But how will you respond? Will he go unnoticed, or will you embrace him and worship?
Hey everybody, good morning. How you guys doing today? Y'all have a good Thanksgiving? It's always nice to have a collective yes. I know nothing about your Thanksgiving, but your yes makes me know everything, so it's good to hear. Wasn't it fun to see Catherine lead worship this morning? I just think it's really cool to see upcoming worship leaders get to develop that ability, so well done. That's kind of cool to see. I pulled a page out of the U.S. government Peace Corps manual for those who serve in the Amazon, and this is what you would do in case you were attacked by an anaconda. Because let's be honest, here in the Silicon Valley, we face that imminent danger every day, don't we? But if you were to face an anaconda, now if you don't know an anaconda, you can show the picture, Justin. An anaconda looks like this. It's about 35 feet long, weighs about 300 or 400 pounds, big creature. So here's what you do if you're attacked by an anaconda. Number one, if you are attacked by an anaconda, do not run. The snake is faster than you are. Number two, lie flat on the ground, put your arms tight against your sides, your legs tight against one another. Number three, tuck your chin in. Number four, the snake will come and begin to nudge and climb over your body. Number five, this is helpful, do not panic. Number six, after the snake has examined you, it will begin to swallow you from the feet and always from that end. Permit the snake to swallow your feet and ankles. Do not panic. Number seven, the snake will now begin to suck your legs into its body. You will lie perfectly still. This will take a long time. Number eight, when the snake has reached your knees, slowly and with as little movement as possible, reach down and take your knife and very gently slide it into the snake's mouth between the edge of its mouth and your leg. Then suddenly rip upwards, severing the snake's head. Number nine, be sure you have your knife. Number 10, be sure your knife is sharp. I don't know about you, when I think about it, I'm like, I can't imagine letting something take control and slowly suck its way up my body. It brings to me just the idea of control. And I've noticed a lot in my own life how much I want to control the things around us. And I just think for us as humans, it's part of our nature to want to control things. I was talking with a friend of mine, and she was telling me all of her apprehensions about going to the dentist. And as I talked about, what she's saying is, when I'm in the dentist chair, I'm like so vulnerable. I have somebody putting their hands on my mouth, and she feels completely out of control. And because of that, she has all this anxiety. I saw recently that they've been a thing, they have the dental button. Have you ever heard or seen this? And what it is the button that it looks like this. They give it to their patients, and if at whatever point they start feeling out of control or nervous, they would hit the button, and it renders the drill useless. I don't know if that's a good thing. I mean, for me, I'd be like poking that thing all the time, you know. Why? Because I just think for all of us, we tend to want to be in control of things. I have a quote from Puff Daddy, and let's be honest, anytime you can quote Puff Daddy in a sermon, it's always a good thing. Puff Daddy says this: don't get yourself in certain circumstances or instances, because it's not a good feeling to be sitting in that chair when you've got other people that are in control of your life. You have an opportunity to be in control of your life for yourself by the decisions that you make. I think for most of us, we're like, yeah, I want to be in the driver's seat. I want to be kind of controlling the folks around me and the circumstances. But if we're a follower of Christ, he calls us into a life of letting go of control and surrendering to him. I want to talk a little bit about that and how worship is involved with our surrendering to God. Last week we talked about worship, and we said that worship was an activity of the human soul. It's not just something that church people do. It's something that everybody does. It's kind of how we're wired. And we said that worship was what we value, we tend to express in worship. And I offered this as one definition for worship. Worship is our expression of delight and enjoyment for who God is and what he's done. Would you say that together with me? Worship is our expression of delight and enjoyment for who God is and what he's done. So that's what we talked about worship, and I gave you a little homework assignment. I don't know how you did, if you were able to track things that you were thankful for. I must confess, I did it a handful of times. There was a few days, I'm laying in bed, and the light's off. I'm like, I think I could just do this in my head and go to sleep. So I just fell asleep. But it's a great discipline to call ourselves to return back to God with gratitude. And today, I want to shift gears, and I want to look at not only worship, but I want you to introduce to you a character maybe you've heard about, Abraham, and how he used private time alone with God to worship him. And he built altars as a way of connecting and surrendering his life to God. So I want to look at that. So if you have your Bibles and you want to turn with me, turn to Genesis, the very first book of the Bible. You're welcome to read the screens above me as we read this. So Genesis chapter 12, let's dive into the text. We've got a lot of text to look at this morning. The Lord had said to Abram, leave your country, your people, and your father's household, and go to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all the peoples on earth will be blessed through you. So Abram left, as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he set out from Haran. He took his wife Sarai, his nephew Lot, all the possessions they had accumulated, and the people they'd acquired in Haran. And they set out for the land of Canaan, and they arrived there. Chapter 12 is a shift in the book of Genesis. Right up to this point, God has been breathing creation into existence. And then there was the rise of man, and you know, Noah. God had him build a flood, and he destroyed the earth. But there was again this rise of pride, and the Tower of Babel, and God disseminated the people. Chapter 12 marks a different place in the chronicle, because what it is God now entering into a unique relationship one-on-one with a person. And he connects this with Abraham. And Abraham becomes this pivotal character that all of our faith is built upon. So what does he do is he calls Abram out of what he has known. Can you imagine your husband or wife coming home and saying, well, we're moving. And you're like, yeah, okay. Where are we going? I don't know. This has got to feel for their family like, what is going on here? Where are we going to? And they don't know, but God just leads them each step along the way. He promises them great blessing. Though they don't have any kids, he promises them blessing. And for most of us, we look and go, wow, you're really not in control. And that's, I think, a beginning step of recognizing what it means to follow Christ is letting go of control. Let's continue on. Abraham traveled through the land as far as the site of the great tree of Moreh at Shechem. At that time, the Canaanites were in the land. The Lord appeared to Abram and said, to your offspring, I will give this land. If you have a pen, would you underline this? So he built an altar there to the Lord, who appeared to him. From there he went toward the hills east of Bethel, and he pitched a tent, with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. There he built an altar to the Lord, and he called on the name of the Lord. Underline that phrase again. Then Abram set out and continued toward the Negev. So with each place that Abram goes, what does he do? He establishes an altar, a place where he worships God. And what I want to suggest to you today is that altars are private places of worship and communion with God. They're places where you and I can come, like Abraham, and connect and call on the name of the Lord. And if you see his life, everywhere he's going now, with each step of the journey, he's connecting in these private places of worship to God. In Abraham's time, offerings and altars were very common. They were always offered to the gods, but there was always a level of uncertainty that came with that. And it went like this. If the gods were good to you and they were smiling on you, things were good, your crops were plentiful, your family was healthy, then you offered a generous offering of thanksgiving. If the gods maybe were frowning on you and things were not going well, you weren't healthy, you still needed to offer a generous offering because somehow you ticked them off and now you need to do something to appease them. this kind of uncertainty was always amongst the people, but something unique is happening with the God of Israel. He's entering into this unique relationship with Abraham. Rob Bell, one of the famous teachers here in the United States, says this, "But here you have God speaking to Abram. This was a concept that had never occurred to the people of Abraham's time. The idea that a God would lower himself to the human level was unthinkable. So God is showing that he desires to commune and have a one-on-one relationship that's unique. Now, if you saw the video clip I showed last week with Michael Jackson and hordes of people worshiping and celebrating, it's easy to get the assumption that what we're doing right here is worship, and it is, gathering together corporately, together to bring our worship. What I think Abraham shows us so beautifully is that we also have moments that we can, and it's necessary for us to connect with God in private times of worship, places where we can come to read, to listen, and to pray to God. I remember in my own life establishing an altar. It was my senior year in high school. I was getting ready for my senior year in high school. And I remember going to church one Sunday. And I'd grown up in a Christian home and heard and watched a lot about following Christ. As I went to the youth group meeting this day, it was actually out on a lawn, and the guy said, as he was teaching, he says, "I dare you," he was talking to these high school kids, "I dare you, this next week, every day, open up your Bible and see if God doesn't show up as you read and pray." And for whatever reason, I kind of took that challenge. So every day I started opening my Bible and just practicing praying to God and listening to him. And for the first time, I just got this sense that God was concerned and involved in my life. It became real for me. During that same time, my father had built, I just grew up a few blocks from here, and we bought a house up in the Los Gatos Hills. I remember him coming home and saying one day, "Hey, we got 5 acres. I remember thinking, 5 acres of property? I could buy a motorcycle. I could finally, have land and stuff. But what he didn't say is the property went like this. But at the top of this, there was this little place where a few trees had fallen over. And I remember I would go out there regularly during this time, my senior year in high school, wondering where I'm going to go, what my next year is going to be like, and having these moments alone with God where I felt like God was communing with me, that he was speaking. It wasn't a burning bush, but I just got the sense that God's presence was there in those moments. How about for you? Dads, do your kids see you come to church? That's great. Did they ever watch you at home open up your Bible? Every morning, literally almost every morning when I was a kid, my dad, I'd get up for the morning, practice my piano, and I'd come there and he'd have his Bible and his notes, and he was studying and reading God's Word. I can tell you as a kid, that spoke volumes to me. I learned from that. Dads, how are you? Do your kids see that discipline in your life? How about for you, wives? I was talking with my sister-in-law one day, and she's had a mother of 4, and she's like, "Oh, Mark, I'm just so stressed and feeling guilty because I should be spending time with God, but I've got all my kids and all the pressures of the family." And as we talked about it, we were saying, well, what if you just took a little card and wrote a verse, slipped it in your pocket, and as you were doing the laundry and you were praying, you were taking out the socks, that you would pray for each kid and maybe review that verse. Just a simple, small way for you to connect with God. Students, I remember talking to a friend of mine, and every time when he was in school, there would be like a bell. He would take just a second and pray. Why? Because he wanted to establish a discipline of connecting with God regularly. And what happens, I think, when we connect with God, we learn what Abraham learns, and that is this: God is our friend. Now, if you read throughout the Bible, sometimes different characters will have names that are given to them. Jeremiah is known as the weeping prophet. David is said to have a heart after God's own heart. Do you know what's spoken of about Abraham? Look what it says in Isaiah. Isaiah 41 says this: "But you, O Israel, my servant, Jacob, who I have chosen, you descendants of Abraham, my friend." God says of Abraham, he is a friend. For many of us, we look at God sometimes like the Wizard of Oz, that we have to come to him with fear and trepidation. But what he desires for us is just to speak to him honestly as a friend would, openly and honestly. And I think God was teaching Abraham to commune with him. And at each place that he went along the journey, he would set up these altars. And what he was learning is that God is his friend. However, he didn't do it perfectly. And I can identify with that. Let's look at the story. It says, "Now there was a famine in the land. Abram went down to Egypt to live there for a while because there was the famine was severe. And as he was about to enter Egypt, he said to his wife Sarai, "I know what a beautiful woman you are. When the Egyptians see you, they will say, 'This is his wife.' Then they will kill me, but will let you live. Say that you are my sister, so that I will be treated well for your sake, and my life will be spared because of you." Cheesy move, really cheesy move here, not bright. When Abraham came to Egypt, the Egyptians saw that she was a very beautiful woman, and when Pharaoh's officials saw her, they praised her to Pharaoh, and she was taken into his palace. He treated Abraham well for her sake, and Abraham acquired sheep and cattle and male and female donkeys, men servants and maid servants and camels. But the Lord, I just stop when I read that. He went down to Egypt, and he doesn't connect with God, but God was watching, and he intervenes. But the Lord inflicted serious diseases on Pharaoh and his household because of Abram's wife Sarai. So Pharaoh summoned Abram. What have you done to me?" he said. "Why didn't you tell me she was your wife? Why did you say she is my sister so that I took her to be my wife? Now then, here is your wife. Take her and go." Then Pharaoh gave orders about Abram to his men, and they sent him on his way with his wife and everything that he had. Abraham kind of goes and he pimps out his wife. And he puts himself in a place very dangerous. Why? Because he kind of takes back control. But I want you to notice something. Beginning of chapter 13, it says, Abram went from Egypt to the Negev with his wife and everything that he had, and Lot went with him. Abraham became very wealthy in livestock and in silver and gold. From the Negev, he went from place to place until he came to Bethel, to the place between Bethel and Ai, where his tent had been earlier, and where he had built his first altar. There, Abram called on the name of the Lord. He fails, he blows it, and he goes right back to moments of intimacy and calling again on the name, private opportunities for worship. Altars are a place where we can reconnect with God when we fail. And you see, God isn't waiting there just to shame us, to wag his big finger in our face and say, "You idiot, what are you doing? What were you thinking?" God is patient with us. I remember wrestling a little bit with that in college. I had a friend, I remember talking to him one day and just saying, doesn't God just look at us constantly in this place where it's like, dude, you're just screwing up? I mean, if he's perfect, does he not see us all the time doing things that are blowing it? Doesn't he look at us in this way that is really unfavorable? And as I was talking with my friend, he actually took me to this place in Jeremiah, and I want you to see something here. Jeremiah Chapter 2, God is speaking, and he just says this very simple phrase. He says, "I remember the devotion of your youth." And he's speaking about Israel. "How as a bride you loved me, and you followed me through the desert, through a land not sown. Israel was holy to the Lord, the first fruits of its harvest." And as I was talking with this friend, he said, "What do you remember about children of Israel?" Well, as they crossed into the desert, as they left Egypt and they crossed the Red Sea, that they were very fickle. They would complain, they would gripe. If you remember, when Moses went up on the hill to get the 10 Commandments, that immediately they set up an altar to another god. That's not what I would consider being devoted. But how does God view that? He says, "I look at that. Those are the great times when you were devoted to me." Why? Because I think for all of us, God looks at this arc of our lives. And yes, we may blow it. We may go 3 steps forward and 2 steps back. But one of the things that I believe Abraham was learning is that not only are altars private places where we can commune with God and reconnect when we fail, but what he was learning is that God is completely okay with the process of us becoming. It really doesn't bug him as long as our heart is soft and repentant. When we blow it, we come back and we seek his forgiveness and his grace. Abraham was learning that he could blow it and that God wouldn't just flick him off. And it's interesting because if you look what happens, if you look over the next few chapters, what begins happening in Abraham's life is he connects multiple times with God. And God continues to reaffirm promises to Abraham, promises of having a son. He's 75, getting up there in years, and his wife's well past childbearing years. But God is promising, "I'm going to bless you and do something amazing." And so he's learning these promises and learning to depend upon God. God also transforms his identity. Early on, if you notice as you follow the text, he's called Abram, which means exalted father. Later on, God changes that and calls him Abraham, meaning father of many. God, in those moments, you guys, he transforms us and he changes our character. What's difficult, though, is if we go through long periods of time where we go to Egypt and we disconnect with God, we don't check in with him and have regular moments of worship. I heard a pastor say one time, he was talking about a vacation that he would have, that every year they would go to Florida, and he and his brother would go on this beach, and they would go swimming. And what he said is his dad would start off the vacation, he'd say, look at guys, there's 2 telephone poles here, and when you're swimming, the current's really strong here, so you're going to hear a foghorn every so often. And when you hear that foghorn, if you're not between those 2 telephone poles, would you get yourself out on shore and walk yourself back, and then you can come back in and play? And the point he made was that for many of us, we can go days and weeks and get ourselves into Egypt and really not check in with God, not regularly submit to him, not regularly listen to him. And so what his point was is that how important it is for all of us to have markers that if we go long periods of time, that we would do something drastic to get ourselves back. And one of the things I've been trying to do in my life is I never let more than 2 days go where I don't have private time alone with God. Not because I think God's going to whack me, but because I don't trust my ability to want to take back control of things. And so if it goes more than a couple days, I'll do something drastic. I'll turn off the TV, I'll get up early because I really value God's input into my life. And I think Abraham's learning that sense of how important it is to develop that regular time alone with God. Yes, he's communing with God. He's discovering God as a friend. He's also discovering that God is okay with him being in process. But one of the things he's going to learn, tell him hi for me, okay? One of the things he's going to learn is that God is going to test us, and he's going to test us in how we surrender. I want you to see something. This may be familiar to some of you, but let's look at chapter 22. Sometime later, God tested Abraham. He said to him, Abraham, here I am, he replied. Then God said, take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains I will tell you about. He recognized immediately who was speaking to him. This is an odd thing to say. He'd been waiting and praying and hearing God promise him that he would have a son. Then God blesses him with a son. And then God comes to him with a real odd request, something that doesn't make any human sense. But because Abraham had trained himself to recognize God's voice, he responded. I remember as a kid, a lot of times, like I said, I grew up just a few blocks from here, and we had a street that was filled with boys. And so we would go out and play together. And I remember I would be at a friend's house. I could even be in my friend's house watching TV. My dad would get home from work, and he would whistle. And I could hear that whistle inside my friend's house with the TV going. And I knew, as soon as I heard that whistle, I need to get back home. I think Abraham had trained himself so much to recognize God's voice that though it seemed odd, he responded. Early the next morning, Abraham got up and he saddled his donkey. He took with him 2 of his servants and his son Isaac. When he had cut enough wood for the burnt offering, he set out for the place God had told him about. On the 3rd day, Abraham looked up and he saw the place in the distance. He said to his servants, stay here with the donkey while I and the boy go over there. We will worship and then we will come back to you. Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering and he placed it on his son Isaac. And he himself carried the fire and the knife. As the 2 of them went on together, Isaac spoke up and said to his father, Father? Yes, my son, Abraham replied. The fire and the wood are here, Isaac said, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering? Abraham answered, God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son. And the 2 of them went on together. When I read that, I wonder, the text doesn't say, but what do you think Abraham's feeling in those moments? Like, what are you doing, God? Just the confusion. And as he walks through these dark hours and waiting to see what's going on here. I wonder if he felt angry. You know, here God promises this, and then now he's telling me he's going to take it away. He might have been confused by what God was doing, but he continues to move on. The text says, when they reached the place God had told him about, Abraham built an altar there, and he arranged the wood on it. He bound his son Isaac, and he laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Then he reached out his hand, and he took the knife to slay his son. Now, I want us to hang here for just a second. Many of you know the story, but I want to just hang on this moment because I think for many of us, this is where we live. You know what I'm saying? You get a phone call. It's bad news. The doctor says there needs to be surgery, and you see yourself in a place where it's going to be months of rehab and surgery and recovery, and you're waiting, wondering, is God in this? Is he going to do something? Maybe you've been laid off. The first month wasn't bad because you knew you had some severance or you had some savings. But now it's been 4, 5, 6 months, and you're wondering, is God going to show up here? Has he got a plan for this? What's he doing? Maybe you've been waiting for somebody to marry. You're waiting. You've dated people and it just hasn't been the right person. You wonder, is there ever going to be somebody for me? You're in those moments. You don't know what God's going to do. But God has a plan, and he's moving, and he's working. But the angel of the Lord called out to him from heaven, Abraham, Abraham. Again, he recognizes God's voice. Here I am, he replied. Do not lay a hand on the boy, he said. Do not do anything to him. Now I know that you fear God, because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son. Abraham looked up, and there in the thicket he saw a ram caught by its horns. He went over and took the ram, and he sacrificed it as a burnt offering instead of his son. So Abraham called the place, the Lord will provide. And to this day it is said, on the mountain of the Lord, it will be provided. Abraham's learning that altars are places where we can be tested to surrender to God. And surrender is giving over control. That is so difficult for us to do, especially when we don't know what the outcome is going to be. I would offer this as just a simple definition for surrender. Surrender is when I generously and willingly allow myself to be acted upon by God. Let me say that again. Surrender is when I generously and willingly allow myself to be acted upon by God. It's when I give over control, when I say, I know it doesn't make sense to me, but I trust you. I heard Chuck Swindoll, famous pastor, say one time, speaking about the things that we are attached to, he said, the tighter we grasp the attachments in our life, the more pain there will be when God has to pry it loose from our fingers. Do you know what the attachments are for you? The things that you're like, God can have this, but he really can't have this. My family, hands off. My possessions. I know for me, sometimes I'm attached to my reputation, what people think of me. I'm attached to my convenience. And God is in the process for all of us of testing us. Are we willing to really give him control? And what Abraham came to find, what he learned through this, was that God is able to provide. God is able to provide. I remember experiencing this as I was sharing with you in high school. I sensed God leading my life. And I was looking to go to Bible college and I had an opportunity to play basketball there. And so before I started my first year of Bible college, right out of high school, I had an opportunity to go play basketball in the Philippines. And I might have shared this to some of you before, but in the Philippines, there was this great opportunity to play basketball and to share about my faith. I thought it was a great marriage, being able to serve God, but also do something I love to do. And what we would do is every day we would go play games, sometimes 2 or 3 games a day, and at the halftime of these games, we would share about our faith, just what God had been doing us. And it was so cool to see people respond to that message. And I was just feeling like, this is what I should be doing. This is so exciting. And a few days later, actually it was probably midway through the trip, I got a rash. I have real bad skin allergies, and so I was walking through some grass one day, and I had a rash. And then the next day I cut, and so I got it a little bit opened. And one day after we finished one of our games, there was a river right next to this Bible college we were staying at in the Philippines, and a bunch of the athletes, we all thought it'd be fun to go swim in there. So we dove in the water and we swam. When we got out, one of the guys came up and he goes, "Where were you guys?" We're like, "Oh, we're just swimming in the river." He goes, "That's not a river. That's the sewer." I'm like, I don't know if it was because of that or what, but a few days later, I developed this terrible infection. And I remember sitting at the free throw line, waiting for the guy to shoot. And I remember standing there, and all of a sudden I felt my ankle go, boom. And it's like my shoe was so tight, I couldn't get it off, and had to cut it off. And so coach looked down, he goes, this is not good. And so they took me to the doctor. And I don't know if you've ever been to a third world hospital, but it does not breed confidence. And I was like, am I going to be okay here? And the guy, he looks at me and he goes, yeah, they won't let you back into the United States with that kind of infection. I was like, well, I'm supposed to start my first year of school, and I'm supposed to play on this team. I need to get back. He said, yeah, well, they're not going to let you back in. And I remember just going, what? And he goes, matter of fact, you can't play anymore. And so the coach took me home, and I was just in this place like, what are you doing, God? I thought you wanted me here serving, and I was finding great joy from it. Now it's like you're taking this away. And it was hard. I mean, because the guys would go off and play their games, and I was left in this hotel room with nothing to do. I didn't speak the language, couldn't go anywhere. I was just having my foot elevated, trying to take some medication. And I remember just crying out to God, struggling with like, why you have me in this place, God? This just seems to make no sense. What a waste of human effort. But God was working. One day, actually a few days later, the coach took us to the beach. And so all the guys were out swimming, and of course I couldn't get in the water, and my attitude was really bad about that. But I was sitting there, and this guy walks up to me. 12 athletes, most of them over 6 feet tall. We kind of stood out in the Philippines. And so he noticed us, and he came up. And as we began talking, I realized that he was really eager to know why we were there, and I began sharing about our mission and what God had called us to do, and his heart was really responsive and wanted to know more about following Christ. I had this wonderful opportunity to share with him God's message. And the exciting thing for me is he prayed right there. He wanted to make a decision to begin following Christ. And the town that he lived in was the town where that Bible college, the sewer was. I said, well, I know the pastor there. This is the guy you want to go see. So he was able to get follow-up. And I was so elated that I had this unique opportunity to do this. And as I was in the car, driving back from the beach, I was sharing this with the team and the coach said, I'll bet you God had you in that place, maybe even for such a time, for such a purpose as that. Well, maybe. The miraculous thing was God did provide. A few days later, for whatever reason I cannot explain, my ankle healed all up. And I was able to head back with the team and start off my first year of college. I don't know if God's going to be as speedy in your life, but I do know this. God is going to provide for you. God will provide. You see, Abraham learned early on to connect with God in private times of worship. He built those altars, and in those moments, he discovered that God is his friend. But he also discovered that altars can be places that you can reconnect when we blow it, knowing that God is okay with what? He's okay with us being in process. But there may be those moments where God tests us, and those altars are places of testing, of letting go, of surrendering our will to God's will. And they're hard. I won't sit here and tell you they are easy. And I know for some of you, you're right in the crucible with it. But can I tell you this? This is a conviction. God will. He will provide. He will provide for you. On the back of your handouts, I left for you some notes. Actually, it's just a little resource. If you have not had the discipline of having regular time alone with God, could I just encourage you, use this maybe as a starting point. What I left for you is there's a little prayer of surrender. I try to pray every day. If that's helpful for you, you're welcome to use that. Also left some notes about a devotional that I use that's been really helpful for me, just connecting alone with God. With one of the other worship leaders, we listed some of our favorite worship CDs. So if you'd like some worship music, maybe some of the stuff we do here, and you want to take that home and worship, there's some of those CDs there. And I also listed a website. I know for many of us, it's hard to squeeze in some moments, and sometimes we're in front of our computer, we're at work or at home, and it's a great time to have a few moments with God. I go to that Sacred Space website. It's a great tool to just have a guided prayer, a place where I can connect with God. Who would have thought the computer is a place where you can build an altar? But it can be. Let's just pray together. Father, we are so grateful that you desire to connect with us, to commune with us. And we want to bring you our worship. Thank you that we don't have to wait for every Sunday to do that. That we can experience the presence of God and connect with you just like a friend, one-on-one. And God, we just voice to you how grateful we are that you're okay with us being in process. Yeah, there are those times where we blow it, but thank you that when we come with a repentant heart, that you embrace us back in, and you look at those times as devoted times to you. Father, for many of us, though, we may find ourselves in a place where you are testing us right now. We're in the crucible, And the question is will we surrender and let you have those things that we're attached to? I pray for my friends here. There may be some here that are really wrestling with that. And in their heart, it's a struggle, God. Lord, would you just breathe into them today? Just breathe into that encouragement that their God will provide. He did for Abraham. He will for them. Their God will provide. We thank you for that in Jesus' name.